She knelt down in the spring field that should have been black-turned earth, and she found it green. Not the green of wheat. The wrong green. Cheatgrass and pigweed chest-high, standing where her husband's crop should have stood. Della Rourke was 52 years old. She did not weep. She knelt there in the Kansas wind and she counted the rows. The rows he never broke. 1, 2, on across the whole east quarter, every one of them choked and wasted and never once touched by a plow. Her name was Della. The man who let that field go to weed was Merrick, the hired hand her husband trusted with everything he owned. 2 weeks after she knelt in that field, at the grange supper in front of 40 of her neighbors, Merrick stood up with his hat in his hand and said it gentle as mercy. A woman alone can't hold ground like this. The kindest thing, Della, the kindest thing is to let it go before the bank does. 40 faces heard him say it. I want you to remember that number. 40. That night I climbed to the loft with a lamp, up to the seed corn I'd paid for back in March. 12 sacks, string-tied, and not one of them had been opened. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before I take you up that ladder, do me one small thing. Subscribe, so the ending finds you. And down in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, and let me go slow. Because you have to understand what she stood to lose before you understand what she did to keep it. It was 1934, and the dust had already come to Kansas. The Rourke place sat outside a little town called Ashgrove in Weller County, out where the land runs flat and the sky does most of the talking. 240 acres of wheat and corn ground. But it hadn't always been that big. When Della married Tom Rourke 30 years back, it was a quarter section and a soddy with a leaking roof, and they were both young enough to think that was plenty. They built the rest of it themselves. An acre at a time. A dry year, then a good one, then 2 dry ones back to back that near broke them. Tom would come in from the field so tired he'd fall asleep in his boots at the kitchen table. And Della would work the laces loose and set them by the stove and let him sleep. 30 years of that. 30 years of putting the seed in and praying the rain came and getting up before the sun to do it all again. That was how the quarter section became 240 acres. Not luck. Not one good break. Just the 2 of them, and the ground, and every single morning. Tom had been dead 2 winters now. It was his heart, in the end. He went out to the barn on a January morning to see to the stock, and he never came back in for his coffee. Della found him in the straw with the milk pail still in his hand. He was 58. She buried him on the rise at the north edge of the home place, where you can see the whole spread if you stand there at evening. She could have sold then. Plenty told her to. A widow, 50, 240 acres and no children, and the whole country sliding into hard times. Sensible people sell, they said. Take the money. Move to town. She didn't move to town. She stayed, because the ground was where Tom was, and because 30 years doesn't let go of you just because a man's heart stops. She got up before the sun. She saw to the stock herself. She kept the books, and she kept the house, and she kept every hired hand Tom had ever put on the payroll. Because that was what Tom would have done, and because in those years, with men riding the rails looking for any kind of work, you did not turn a working man out if you could help it. And she kept Merrick. Understand this part, because it matters more than any other thing I'm going to tell you. Merrick had been the hired man on the Rourke place for 6 years. Tom brought him on when Cole was 35, a big quiet fellow who could fix a broke-down tractor and set a straight fence line and read the sky for weather. Tom liked him. Tom trusted him. And in the last week Tom was alive, weak and gray and knowing it, he took Della's hand across the bed and he told her the one thing he most wanted her to hold on to. Keep Cole on, he said. Cole knows this ground. Those were near the last clear words her husband ever spoke to her. Cole knows this ground, so she kept him on. Of course she kept him on. How could she not? Her husband had all but handed the man to her from his deathbed. When Tom died, Cole came to the funeral in his one good shirt and stood at the back with his hat in his two hands. And he didn't say much. Cole was never a man who said much. But Della looked at his still, closed-up face, and she thought, "There is a man grieving the same as me." She mistook his stillness for grief. She thought his quiet was her own quiet. That was her blind spot, and I'll not pretend to you it wasn't. She trusted the one man Tom told her to trust, and she read his silence as sorrow because sorrow was what filled her own. So the 2 winters passed. And Cole ran the fieldwork, the way he had when Tom was living, and Della kept the house and the books and the money, and it seemed to work. The first spring after Tom died, the crop went in fine and came off fair. Not a rich year, no year was rich then, but they made the note at the bank and they had seed for the next go. Della thanked Cole for it. She thanked him honestly. She thought the Lord had left her one good man in a bad time. Now here is where it starts to turn, and it turns so quiet you could miss it. So watch close. It was the second spring. The spring of this story, and by the middle of May the east quarter was still not broken. You have to know what that means, out on a wheat and corn place. Come spring, you turn the ground and you get the corn in, and there's a window for it, and the window closes. Every farmer in Weller County knew when that window was. Tom had known it in his bones. And here it was, deep into May, warm days one after another, and that whole East 60 sat there unturned, last year's stubble gone gray, the volunteer weeds already coming up green. Della saw it from the wagon road one morning, and it caught at her. She'd walked past it a dozen times without thinking, the way you do with your own place, but that morning something in her went still. She found Cole in the machine shed, greasing the corn planter. "The east quarter's not in," she said. Cole didn't look up right off. He finished the fitting he was working, wiped his hands slow on a rag. Then he looked at her with that steady, sorry face. "Ground's too dry to turn, Della," he said. "You break it now. Dry as it is, you're just going to blow half the topsoil into the next county. And the seed won't take in dust. No sense wasting good seed corn in dry ground. We wait for a rain, we'll get it in yet." And you know, it made sense. That's the thing I need you to feel. In 1934, in Kansas, with the dust storms rolling black across the whole plains and the papers full of ruined farms, a man who told you not to plant into dry ground sounded like the only sane voice in the county. Everybody had heard about seed thrown away on dust that never came up. Cole wasn't wrong that it could happen. He was only wrong that it was happening here, but she couldn't see that, standing in the machine shed, looking at a man who'd been right about the weather for 6 years. "You'll get it in then," she said. "When the rain comes." "When the rain comes," Cole said, "soon as it's fit." And she believed him. She went back to the house and she made the dinner, and she never gave it another thought, because why would she? Now that same week, and I want you to mark this, because it's a little thing, the kind of little thing that turns out to be the whole story. Della did what she'd done every spring for 30 years. She filed the paper. Tom had always kept the paper, every order for seed, every bill for twine and sulfate and coal oil and nails, every receipt from the feed and seed in town. Tom folded it once the long way, and he put it in an old cigar box he kept on the pantry shelf. An old Glory cigar box, red and blue, the lid gone soft at the corners from 30 years of thumbs. Tom couldn't have told you why he kept them so careful. His own father had done it, Della supposed. It was just a habit, the way some men keep a knife sharp or their tools hung in the same place. The old Glory box on the pantry shelf, and the year's paper going into it a slip at a time. And when Tom died, Della kept doing it. Not for any reason. She never once thought, this will matter someday. She'd have laughed if you'd told her. She kept filing the paper in the cigar box because Tom always had, and doing the small thing Tom always did was one more way of keeping him near. The spring seed order, the bill for binder twine, the charge slips from Craddock's store in town. She folded each one the long way, the way Tom folded them, and she set them in the old glory box on the pantry shelf, and she shut the lid. Remember that box. That's all I'll say for now. Remember the box. The rain didn't come, and the east quarter stayed in weeds, and June came on, and Della found she couldn't quite let it lie. It was a Tuesday, and she'd driven the wagon into Ashgrove for flour and a few things. Ashgrove wasn't much: a grain elevator, a church, a bank, and Craddock's Feed and Seed, which was the store where every farm family in the county bought what a farm needs. Ott Craddock had run that store 30 years, same as Dell had been married 30 years. And he knew every account in the county down to the last nail. Ott was a small, dry, careful man with ink on his fingers and a green eye shade he wore behind the counter, and he kept his charge ledger like some men keep scripture. Della was at the counter, and Ott was wrapping her flour in brown paper, and he made the kind of talk a storekeeper makes. "How's your corn coming, Della?" "Slow," she said. "The east ground's still not in. Cole says it's too dry to turn." Ott's hands stopped on the paper for just a second. Just a second. Then he went on rapping. "Too dry," he said. And there was something under it. "Well, you'd know better than me." He tied the string. And then, offhand, not making anything of it, the way a man mentions the weather, he said, "Figured Cole would have been in for his seed corn weeks back. Most everybody's had theirs a good while. He must be cutting it close, waiting on that rain." Now Cole was outside, loading the wagon, and just then he came in through the door for the sack of flour, and he heard the tale of it. And Cole laughed. Easy, warm, he clapped a big hand on the counter and he said, "Ott, you know how it is. The missus worries. Tom worried too. God rest him. I'll have that seed in the ground before you can blink. Don't you fret about the Rourke place." And he hoisted the flour and gave Ott a nod and carried it out, and it was all so easy, so friendly, that it just went by. Ott shrugged and finished her order. Della paid and climbed up on the wagon beside Cole, and they drove home. But the sentence lodged. Figured Cole would have been in for his seed corn weeks back. It sat in the bottom of Della's mind like a stone in a boot. Most everybody's had theirs a good while. She didn't do anything about it. What was there to do? A storekeeper's small talk, a hired man's easy laugh. But that night, drying the supper dishes, she caught herself looking at the pantry shelf, at the old glory box, and she didn't know why. She put the plate away, and she told herself she was a foolish, fretting woman, exactly like Cole said, and she went to bed. She should have listened to the stone in her boot. But that's the way it goes, isn't it? The warning comes so small and so quiet that trusting the man feels easier than doubting him. And Cole Merrick was counting on exactly that. "Now I'm going to take you to the Grange supper. This is the one I opened with, and I brought you the whole way around so you'd feel it right when we got here." The Grange Hall was where the county came together. Every few weeks in the growing season there'd be a supper. The women brought pies and covered dishes, the men talked crops and prices and weather. And for one evening the hard times got put off at the door. It was the closest thing to a party those people had. 40 of them there that night, easy, the Craddocks. The neighbors from all up and down the section roads. Families Della had known her whole married life. She brought 2 dried apple pies, and she set them on the long table with all the rest, and for a little while it was good. It was warm. It was the sound of her own people. Cole was there. Cole always came to the suppers now. As the hired man on a widow's place, he'd taken on a kind of standing. Folks looked to him, a little, the way they'd looked to Tom. He'd stand with the men and talk, knowing about the drought and the dust, and how a fellow had to be smart to hold on in a year like this, and men nodded at what he said. Della had been glad of it before. It seemed a good thing that the county respected the man who ran her place. After the eating, when the plates were being cleared, the talk turned, the way it did every time, that year, to who was going under. This farm sold up, that family gone to California. This note called at the bank. And somebody, meaning nothing by it, asked how the Rourke place was faring, a woman running 240 acres alone. And Cole Merrick stood up. He stood up slow, and he took his hat off, and he held it in his two big hands, and he had the sorriest, kindest look on his face you ever saw. He looked at Della down the table. And then he looked around at all his neighbors, and he said it. I'll tell you the truth, folks, because somebody ought to. And I say it as a man who loves that place and loved Tom Rourke like my own kin. He turned his hat in his hands. A woman alone just can't hold ground like this. It's no shame on Della. Lord knows she works harder than any two men. But the fields are getting away from us. The dry's beating us. And I've come to think the kindest thing I could say to her, is to let it go. Sell it. Or let the bank take it while there's still something to walk away with, before it takes everything. I'd not be her friend if I didn't say it plain. And then he sat down and put his hat back on and bowed his head like a man who'd done a hard, decent duty. And they laughed. Not cruel. That's what I need you to understand. If they'd laughed cruel, it wouldn't have cut half so deep. They laughed soft and kind and sorry, the way people laugh when a hard thing gets said gentle, the way you laugh to let the air out of a sad room. A few of the women reached over and patted Della's hand. Poor Della. Somebody said, now Cole, she's tougher than you think, and everybody chuckled, warm, agreeing, and the moment passed on into other talk. It was mercy. It was neighborly, and it buried her alive. Because in 1 minute, in front of 40 people, the failing of those fields had stopped being the drought's fault and stopped being Cole's fault and become hers. Her failure. The widow who couldn't hold her husband's ground. That's what left the Grange Hall that night in 40 mouths and rode home down every section road in the county. Poor Della Rourke. She'll have to sell. Cole says so. And Cole would know. Cole runs the place. Della did not answer him. She did not stand up and argue. What was there to say? Every word he'd spoken sounded true. The fields were in weeds. She was a woman alone. She got up from the bench, and she gathered the empty pie plates, hers and her neighbors', and she carried them back to the kitchen to wash them. And while her hands were in the dishwater, in the warm noise of the Grange kitchen, Della Rourke did a strange thing. She counted. She counted, in her head, the sacks of seed corn up in her own loft. 12. She'd paid for 12 sacks in March. She could see the bill for it. She could see her own hand filing it in the old glory box. 12 sacks of good seed corn, bought and paid for and hauled up to the loft in the spring, and the east quarter standing empty in weeds because the ground was, Cole said, too dry to plant. Too dry to plant. But she'd bought the seed. Where was the seed? She dried the plates, and she stacked them, and she said her goodnights, and she rode home in the dark beside Cole, who talked easy the whole way about nothing, and she said not one word about any of it. But the stone in her boot had become something heavier. And when she got home, she did not go to bed. She lit the lamp. And she went up to the loft. Now I told you I'd bring you back here, and here we are. Della Rourke, 52 years old, in her black dress from the supper, climbing the loft ladder one-handed with a lamp in the other, up into the dark and the dust and the smell of old hay. Her heart was going hard, and she didn't rightly know why. She got up onto the loft floor, and she held the lamp out, and she looked. The seed corn sat where it had sat since March. 12 sacks, stacked against the north wall. Each one tied off at the neck with the store's string, the same string Ott Craddock's boy tied every sack with. Della crossed the loft floor, and she knelt down by them in her black dress, and she set the lamp on the boards. And she looked at the string. Every knot tied. Every neck cinched shut. She put her hand on the first sack, and she pressed it and felt the hard round kernels shift inside, full, all the way full. She lifted the loose corner of the second one. The string held. Not cut. Not loosed. Not one sack of that seed corn had been opened. Not one. She knelt there a long time with the lamp burning. Because she understood it now. Slow and complete and cold all the way through. The fields hadn't failed. The drought hadn't beaten them. The seed she'd bought and paid for was sitting right here, 12 sacks of it, string-tied and full, while Merrick told the whole county the ground was too dry to plant and a woman alone ought to let it go. The East Quarter wasn't empty because it couldn't be planted. It was empty because it hadn't been. On purpose. Every day he told her to wait on the rain. Every day the seed sat in her loft and the weeds grew another inch. The fields didn't fail. They were let to fail. And the man who let them fail was the man her husband told her, dying, to trust. She didn't cry. I told you at the start she didn't cry. And she didn't. She took up the lamp and she went back down the ladder, careful, one rung at a time. She went into the house. She went to the pantry. And she took down the Old Glory cigar box off the shelf, Tom's box, and she sat down at the kitchen table where 30 years ago she'd worked the laces loose on a sleeping man's boots, and she opened the lid. And for the first time in her life, Della Rourke read that paper like a stranger. Not like a wife tucking away her husband's habit. Like a woman who does not know these people and wants to know exactly what happened. She spread it out under the lamp. The seed corn bill from March, 12 sacks, paid, the order for binder twine. The money drawn for sulfate. Slip by slip, she laid Tom's careful paper out on the table, everything the Rourke place had bought and paid for that year. And she began that night to see the shape of a thing she was not yet ready to say out loud. Money had gone out, she'd signed for it. And the fields had nothing to show. Where did it go? Where did all of it go? She sat at that table until the lamp burned low, and she put every slip back in the box in order, and she shut the lid, and she set the box back on the shelf exactly where Tom kept it. And she went to bed, and in the morning she got up before the sun and fed Merrick his breakfast. And she said nothing at all. Understand what that took? She knew. That morning, passing him his eggs, she knew what he was, and she poured his coffee and she asked if he'd want more bread. Because she wasn't ready. She had the shape of it, but not the proof of it. And a woman with a shape and no proof is just a bitter widow the county already pities. She'd learned that at the grange. So she held her tongue, and she watched, and she waited, and she let Merrick believe that his kind speech at the supper had done its work and the ground was as good as his. It got worse before she could move. It always does. 10 days later, the letter came from the bank. Weller County Farmers and Merchants Bank in a stiff envelope, and Della opened it standing by the mailbox at the road. It was a notice of foreclosure. The note on the Rourke place, the mortgage Tom had carried and she had carried after him, $2,150 still owing, had come due, and there'd be no crop to pay it, and the bank was calling it. She had 90 days. 90 days, and then the place, the house, the barn, the 240 acres, the rise at the north edge where Tom was buried, would be sold on the courthouse steps to whoever bid highest. To satisfy the note. She stood at the mailbox and read it twice. The paper shook a little in the wind, or in her hand. $2,150 called on a harvest that never came. A harvest that never came because the seed sat string-tied in her loft. She folded the letter once, the long way, the way Tom folded paper, and she put it in her apron pocket, and she walked back up to the house. That would have been enough. That was near enough to break her. But there was one more thing, and she learned it 2 days after, and it was the thing that turned her grief hard as a plow point. She learned it off the party line. You have to know how it was, those country telephones, everybody on one line, and you'd pick up to make a call and there'd be 2 neighbors already talking, and you'd set the earpiece down quiet, or sometimes you wouldn't. Della picked up the earpiece to call the church about a sick woman, and there were 2 voices already on the wire, and she was about to hang up when she heard a name. Her own place. And she stood there in her own kitchen with the earpiece pressed to her ear, and she listened, and she went cold. They were saying that Merrick had already been to the bank. that he'd already sat down with Harlan Boyd, the loan officer, sat down like a serious man of business about taking the Rourke place off the bank's hands. When it came up for sale. When Della lost it. Cole had a little money put by, folks said, and he knew that ground better than anybody, and wasn't it a mercy, really? That at least it'd stay with a man who'd worked it, a man Tom had trusted. Wasn't that the best that could be hoped for the poor woman? Della set the earpiece back on the hook. And she stood in her kitchen a long while, very still, and she looked at the old glory box on the pantry shelf. Because now she had it all. Now she could see the whole of it, laid out clean as a furrow. Cole hadn't just let the fields go, he'd let them go for a reason. Starve the ground, kill the crop. No crop, no money for the note. No money, the bank calls the loan. The bank sells the place cheap, ruined land, weeds and dust who'd pay much for that, and the man waiting at the auction with a little money put by, the man who ruined it, buys 240 acres for the price of 40. Every day of too dry to plant had been a step in it. The kind words at the grange had been a step in it. He wasn't trying to save her from losing the farm, he was the reason she was losing it. He had built her ruin with his own 2 hands, 1 unplanted acre at a time, so he could buy it off the wreckage for pennies. And her husband, dying, had put the knife in the man's hand himself. Cole knows this ground. He knew it. He knew it well enough to kill it on purpose. Now here is where a lot of women, a lot of people, men too, would have done one of 2 things. They'd have gone straight at him, screaming, and got nothing but a hired man's easy laugh and a county that pitied them worse. Or they'd have gone to the bank and wept and begged Harlan Boyd for more time, and got a form letter and a pat on the hand. Della Rourke did neither. And this is the moment the whole story turns on, so I want you here with me for it. She did nothing loud at all. She got up the next morning before the sun, same as every morning of her life. She made Cole his breakfast and she poured his coffee and she thanked him for trying so hard against the drought. She said it plain and she said it warm, and she watched it land, watched him take it, watched the ease come into his shoulders as he believed that the widow was beaten and grateful and would sign whatever paper the bank put in front of her. Let him believe it. She wanted him to believe it. A man who thinks he's already won stops watching his back. And then, when he'd gone out to the fields to not plant them, Della Rourke hitched the wagon herself, in the gray before the sun was full up, and she drove into Ashgrove, not to the bank, not to cry to Harlan Boyd. She drove to Craddock's Feed and Seed, and she was standing at the door when Craddock unlocked it, green eye shade already on, ink already on his fingers. She said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to do it careful, and I'd be obliged if you kept it between us for now. Ott looked at her face. Whatever he saw there, the small talk went out of him, and he set his hands flat on the counter and he said, Ask it, Della. I want a copy, she said, of every order Cole Merrick charged to the Rourke account since Tom died. Everything he bought, everything he didn't. I want it in your hand, off your ledger, with the dates. She set her purse on the counter. And I'll pay you for your time to write it out. And Craddock, careful, dry, 30 years of books Craddock, who'd stopped his hands on that brown paper the day she said Cole told her the ground was too dry. Craddock reached under the counter and lifted up his charge ledger, the big one, and set it on the boards between them, and opened it to the R's. He looked down at the page a moment. Then he looked up at Della. I don't need paid to tell the truth, he said. But you'd best sit down, Della, because I've been wondering about this a good while, and I don't think you're going to like what my book says he bought. And Della Rourke pulled up the stool by the counter, and she sat down, and she began the file. Ott ran his finger down the page, and he did not hurry. Here's the first, he said. March, 2 weeks after Tom Stone went in. Cole comes in and charges to your account. 12 sacks of seed corn, good corn, Iowa hybrid, the kind Tom favored. He looked up. You got that corn. I got it, Della said. It's in my loft, string-tied. Not one sack opened. Ott held her eye a second, then he wrote something on the pad by his hand. "All right," he said. "Now watch." And he turned the page. "April," he said. "Coal charges twine. Charges 100 pounds of sulfate of ammonia. Charges a can of axle grease and a keg of nails and a new singletree for the harrow." His finger moved. "May, he charges nothing. June, nothing. The whole growing season, Della, off your account after that first March buy, near about nothing. A little kerosene. A sack of flour. Man's gotta eat." "That's the ground being worked," Della said. "Slow. Twine's for binding. Sulfate's for feeding the wheat." "That's what it looks like on the page," Ott said. "That's what it's supposed to look like." He set his pencil down flat. "But I sell the twine, Della. I sell the sulfate. And I know to the pound what a man carries out my door. Cole Merrick charged you 100 pound of sulfate in April. He carried out 10. I weighed it. I remember, because I asked him did he want the rest held, and he said no, the missus was watching the money and 10 would do." The store was quiet. A fly worked the window glass. "The rest," Della said. "Went on your bill," Ott said. 90 pound of feed you paid for that never came off my dock. Same with the twine. Same with 2 of the seed sacks, near as I can figure, charged 14, I only ever loaded 12 on his wagon." He shut the ledger, gentle, like closing a Bible. "I don't know where the difference went, Della. That's not for me to say, and I won't say it. But your account paid for a crop, and my doc says the crop was never bought to plant." Della sat on the stool with her purse in her lap. She did not cry. She'd done her crying 2 winters back, in a church, over a box in the ground, and she had none left over for a man who was still breathing. "Write it out," she said. "Every line, what I paid, what left your doc, with the dates and your name to it. It'll take me the day." "I've got the day," Della said. "I've got 90 of them. And I mean to use every one." She drove home in the long light with a copy of Ott Craddock's book folded flat against her heart, under her coat, where a woman keeps the things she can't afford to lose. That night she took Tom's cigar box down off the pantry shelf. The old glory box. Faded blue and gold, the eagle worn near white where 30 years of Tom's thumb had opened the lid. She'd never read what was in it. Tom kept the paper. That was Tom's job. And after he died, she just kept keeping it, out of habit, the way you keep a dead man's coat on the hook. She'd filed the spring orders in it this March without a thought. Just paper. Just the way it was done. She sat at the kitchen table under the lamp and she read it now like a stranger. And there it all was. In her own hand, and Ott's carbon both. Seed corn, paid. Sulfate, paid. Twine, paid. Every dollar the ground was supposed to eat, drawn down out of the account, signed for, gone. She laid Ott's ledger copy beside her own receipts, line against line, the way Tom used to balance the book against the checkbook on the first of the month. What she paid for, what actually crossed the dock. The 2 columns did not match. They were never meant to match. The difference between them was a man's whole plan, laid out in pencil, plain as a row of fence posts. She understood it then, all the way down. The fields had not failed. She had walked out in May and found them green with cheatgrass and pigweed and told herself it was the drought, because Cole told her it was the drought, and Cole knew this ground, Tom had said so. Cole knows this ground. Tom's last clear words meant as a kindness, a dead man handing his wife the one thing he trusted. And Cole had taken that trust and turned it into a weapon and pointed it at the 240 acres Tom was buried on. Starve the crop. Draw the seed money. Let the fields go to weed under cover of a dry spring. Let the note come due on a harvest that never came. Then stand at the courthouse and buy the ruin cheap, with the very dollars he'd bled out of her account to make it. She sat with that a long while. The lamp burned low. Somewhere out past the barn a coyote called and got no answer. Then Della Rourke did a thing that surprised even her. She did not go out to the bunkhouse and put a shell in Tom's shotgun and end it the loud way. She squared the papers. She tied them with a piece of the twine she had, in fact, paid for. And she put them back in the old glory box, and she put the box back on the pantry shelf, exactly where Tom kept it, exactly where nobody looking for money would ever think to look. Then she went to bed. And in the morning she got up and she cooked Merrick his eggs. That was the hardest thing. Harder than the loft. Harder than Ott's book. She fried his eggs and she poured his coffee and she said, "You've worked hard against this drought, Cole. I know you have. Nobody could have made a crop out of a spring like that." And Merrick looked up at her over the rim of the cup, and something eased in his face, some watchfulness she hadn't even known was there until she saw it go. He thought he'd won. She'd handed him the thought on a plate with his breakfast, and he'd swallowed it whole. "It's a hard business, Della," he said, gentle as anything. "Land like this needs a lot of man to hold it. No shame in a woman knowing when to let a thing rest." "No," Della said. "No shame in that." And she smiled at him, and she cleared his plate, and inside her chest something turned to iron and stayed that way. For 3 weeks she lived that lie. She fed him. She thanked him. She let him drive her to town and tip his hat to Harlan Boyd on the bank steps, the two of them easy together in a way that told her all she needed to know about how far this went. She let Cole believe she'd sign whatever the bank slid across the desk. And every day, while he was out in the fields not working them, she built her file. She matched every line twice. She wrote it out clean, in a hand a stranger could read, what she paid against what the doc gave, so that a man who'd never met her could look at the 2 columns and see the theft plain. And once she near got caught. She was up in the loft with the box open on a hay bale, counting the seed sacks one more time, needing to be certain. 12. String tied, unopened, when she heard boots on the ladder rungs. Cole's voice came up ahead of him. "Della? You up here?" She had the box open. The papers were spread. There was no time to close it, and there was no time to lie. So she pulled the horse blanket off the nail and dropped it over the whole works, box and papers both, one motion. And she was standing with a seed sack in her arms when his head cleared the loft floor. "I'm counting what corn's left," she said. "Thought I might sell the seed back to Ott. No sense keeping corn I've got no ground for." And Cole looked at the sack in her arms, 12 string-tied sacks stacked at the wall behind her, and he did not see the shape of a blanket over a hay bale because he was not looking for it. He was looking at a beaten woman selling off her seed. It fit what he already believed. A man who thinks he's already won stops watching his back. "I'll haul 'em in for you," he said. "Get you a few dollars." "Every little bit." "I'd be obliged," Della said. He came up for a coil of rope off the far peg, and he went back down the ladder, and she stood in the loft with her heart going like a hammer and the blanket over her whole life, not 3 feet from his boot. When his wagon rolled out, she sat down on the bale and let her hands shake for exactly 1 minute. Then she stopped them. She had work to do. The last piece she needed was not paper she had. It was paper she didn't. So she wrote to the county agent, the man the state sent around to look at soil and blight and the price of hogs, and she asked him, plain, to come walk her fields and put in writing what he saw. Not what she said. Not what Cole said, what the ground itself said. He came on a Tuesday. A dry, stooped man named Pell, with a soil auger and a notebook, and no side in the thing at all. Della walked him out to the east quarter, and she said nothing. Nothing at all. She just let him look. And Pell walked the rows that were never rows. He knelt, and he pulled the cheatgrass and looked at the root. He augured the dirt and crumbled it in his fingers and smelled it. He walked the whole east 60, and he came back with his hat pushed off his forehead and a look on his face like a man who'd found something that offended him professionally. "Mrs. Rourke," he said, "who told you this ground wouldn't turn this spring?" "My hired man," Della said. "He said it was too dry to break. Said there was no sense wasting seed on dust." Pell looked back out at the field. "This ground had moisture enough to break in April, and it'll show you why," he said. "Look at the weed on it. That's not one dry spring's growth, ma'am. Cheatgrass that high, pigweed gone to woody stalk, that's a field that was let alone the whole season. On purpose or by neglect, I can't tell you the why. But I can tell you the what, and I'll put my name to it. This field wasn't beaten by drought. It was never fought at all. Would you write that?" Della said. "In your hand, with your title under it." And Pell, who had no dog in the fight and therefore nothing to be afraid of, wrote it. A single page, plain as fence posts. That the growth on the Rourke East Quarter was consistent with a full season of deliberate non-cultivation and not with drought failure. He signed it, County Agricultural Agent, Weller County, and he handed it to her, and he tipped his hat, and he drove off, never knowing he'd just fired the second barrel. Della put his page in the Old Glory box with the rest. Now she had it all. What she paid, the cigar box. What Cole bought, Ott's ledger. What the ground said, Pell's page. And the 12 sacks themselves, string-tied, the dumb honest proof a child could understand, seed corn, paid for, never once opened. She had it all, and the sale day came. Harlan Boyd caught her outside the bank a week before. Friendly, in that oily banking way, a man delivering bad news like it was a favor. "Della, I won't lie to you, it grieves me," he said. "But I want you to hear it from me and not the crier. We've got one qualified bid in hand already for the place. A cash bid. Fair, given the shape of the land. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. You'll walk away clean, note settled, maybe $1 or $2 over. There's worse ways for a hard year to end." "There surely are," Della said. "Thank you, Harlan, for telling me kind." And she watched him smile, relieved, thinking her broke and grateful, and she thought, you never checked whose bid you were holding. You never once asked why the only man who wanted this ruined ground was the man who ruined it. Cole tightened too that last week. He could feel her calm, and it troubled him, the way still water troubles a man who expected splashing. So he did what such men do. He went softer. He told the neighbors, here and there, over the wagon gate and the store counter, that poor Della had taken a hard turn since Tom passed, couldn't hardly manage, and wasn't it a mercy the bank would take the worry off her. He even came to her, hat in hand, the night before the sale, and offered, kindly, oh so kindly, to see to it she kept the house and the garden plot when he had the place. A roof over the widow, the kindest thing. "That's Christian of you, Cole," Della said. "It's only right," Cole said. "Tom was good to me." "Tom was," Della agreed. And she shut the door, and she stood behind it in the dark, and for the first time in 3 weeks she let herself smile the whole way. Sale day was the first cool morning of the fall. The Weller County Courthouse sat square on the town, limestone steps going up to double doors, and at the foot of those steps the auctioneer set his table with the deed papers weighted down under a river stone. Harlan Boyd stood beside him in his town suit. And out in the square, more than anybody expected on a foreclosure, the trucks came in. They came from Ashgrove and from the sections around it. Old Fords and a Rio and wagons still, teams stamping. 40 neighbors and more, the same faces that had sat at the Grange supper and heard Cole Merrick say a woman alone can't hold ground like this. They didn't come to bid. Most of them couldn't have raised the price of a plow horse. They came because it was one of their own on the block, and in a year like that one you came and stood, because next spring it might be you on the steps. Cole Merrick came in a clean shirt. He stood near the front, easy, a man at his own coronation, and he nodded to the ones who'd nod back. Della Rourke drove in last, and she drove in slow. She had the wagon, and in the wagon bed, under a tarp, she had 12 sacks. Ott Craddock rode on the seat beside her with his big charge ledger flat on his knees. And on the courthouse steps, off to the side, waited the dry stoop shape of Pell the county agent, his single page folded in his coat. Boyd cleared his throat and read the notice out. The Rourke place, 240 acres, Weller County, sold at the courthouse door to satisfy a note of $2,150. He asked, in the flat way of a man doing a chore, for bids. "I'll enter the bid in hand," Boyd said, and lifted a paper. "Cash from Mr. Cole Merrick, in the amount of—" "Before you say the amount, Harlan," Della's voice was not loud. But the square had gone the kind of quiet where a low voice carries to the back, and it did. She came up out of the crowd with the Old Glory cigar box under her arm. She climbed the 3 steps to the auctioneer's table, and she set the box down on it, next to the deed and the riverstone, and she turned and faced not the bank but the county. "I've got one question," she said, "and I'd like the answer put on the record before this ground changes hands. How does a wheat farm go to weed," she said, "while every dollar of the seed money leaves the bank?" Nobody spoke. Boyd's mouth was open around the amount he'd not yet said. "Because that's what happened," Della went on, and her voice stayed dry and level, a woman reading a grocery list. "And I can show you in 3 hands that aren't mine that it was made to happen." She opened the cigar box. "This is what I paid. March, my account buys 12 sacks of seed corn, 100 pounds of sulfate, twine to bind a crop. Paid in full. Here's the receipts, in my husband's box, where he kept the paper 30 years. She set Ott's ledger open beside it. "And this," she said, "is Ott Craddock's charge book that says what actually came off his dock. 10 pounds of sulfate where I paid for 100. No twine to speak of. And the seed." She looked out at them. "The seed came. All right. 12 sacks. Came to my loft in March and sat there. Because a field can't go green with corn if the corn never leaves the sack." She nodded, and behind her at the wagon 2 young neighbor men pulled the tarp back and began to lift the sacks down. String-tied. Fat, unopened, they stood them up in a row on the courthouse steps. One after another, 12 of them, in the cool morning light, for 40 witnesses to count with their own eyes. "There's the seed I paid for," Della said. "Not one sack cut. A season in the loft." Then she turned, and she looked straight at Cole Merrick, and she said the thing she had carried up out of the loft with a lamp folded next to her heart for 90 days. "You let the fields go to weed to buy them cheap, Cole." She said it quiet. She said it slow. "I kept every bill you never paid, and every sack you never opened." You could hear the horses in the quiet after it. Pell came forward then, unasked, and he handed his page to Boyd, and he said it plain the way he'd said it in her field. "County agent, Weller County. I walked that east quarter. That's a full season's neglect on it, not a drought. I put my name to that." Harlan Boyd stood on the top step with the bid sheet in one hand and Pell's page in the other, and the color went out of his face by degrees. Like water going down a drain. Because Harlan Boyd was not a brave man, and he was not, at bottom, a wicked one. He was only a man who wanted a clean, fast foreclosure, and had never once asked the question Della just asked in front of the whole county. And now he saw it. The bank could foreclose on an honest ruin all day long. The bank could not stand on these steps and sell the ground to the very man who'd been proven, in 3 hands and 12 sacks, to have engineered the ruin, not without the bank owning a piece of the fraud itself. He could feel 40 pairs of eyes deciding, right now, this morning, what kind of institution the Weller County Farmers and Merchants Bank was going to be. He folded the bid sheet. His hands were not quite steady. In light of, his voice cracked, and he started over. "In light of information brought this morning, the bank withdraws the sale. Pending review." He put the riverstone back on the deed like a man setting down something hot. "There'll be no sale today." He was not afraid of Della. He was afraid of the county. It was the same thing, that morning, and it was enough. And Cole Merrick reached for the only tool he had ever needed. He smiled. He turned that easy, gentle, mercy-soft smile out on the crowd. The one that had worked at the Grange supper, the one that had turned 40 people's pity onto a widow with a word. He spread his hands. "Folks," he said, warm, sorrowful, "you can all see what this is. A hard year and a harder loss have got the poor woman turned around. She's standing here with a cigar box full of old paper. Half of it she don't understand. And she's calling a man a thief for a spring that God sent dry. It's a sad thing to watch. She's just," he shook his head, kind as a preacher, "she's just a grieving old woman with a box of receipts." He looked around for the laughter that had come so easy the last time. It did not come. And into the quiet where the laughter should have been, Craddock spoke. He had not raised his voice in the store, and he did not raise it now. He stood at the foot of the steps with his ledger open on his 2 hands, and he said 4 words. "The ledger isn't confused." That was all. The ledger isn't confused. And it landed heavier than any shout. Because every man in that square had bought nails and flour and twine off Craddock's book. And every one of them knew that Ott's book did not lie, had never lied, was the one true accounting in the whole county of who owed what and who carried what out the door. Cole's smile stayed on his mouth a second too long. And then, slow, it found no purchase anywhere. Not on Ott. Not on Pell. Not on Boyd, who wouldn't look at him now. Not on the 12 sacks standing in a row like witnesses that couldn't be cross-examined. And not, this was the thing that broke it, not on the neighbors. The men who'd nodded to him coming in. They were looking at him now the way you look at a dog you'd trusted around the children. And one by one, the faces that had laughed at the Grange, that had repeated his kindest thing to let it go over their own supper tables, one by one they stopped meeting his eyes. His kindest thing curdled right there in the open air, in every mouth that had passed it along. He didn't shout. Men like that don't. When the room turns, they just get small. Merrick looked at the crowd once more and found no face to land on, and he went down off the steps and through the parting people to his wagon, and the parting was the loudest thing of all, the way they stepped back to let him by, and not one of them said a word. Della didn't watch him go. She was gathering her paper back into Tom's box, careful, in order. The way she'd tied it up in the loft that first hard night. The neighbors came up to the steps then, quiet, the way people come up after a funeral. Not many words. A hand on her shoulder. Ruth Craddock took both her hands and held them. Somebody's boy carried the seed sacks back to her wagon without being asked. That was the county's way of saying what it couldn't say in speeches. 1 year on, the east quarter was black-turned and green. The right green. Not the false green of cheatgrass and pigweed, the deep, ordered green of winter wheat come up in rows a man had actually drilled, headed now and heavy and going gold at the tips in the long light of a June evening. Della Rourke stood on the porch at dusk with a cup of coffee going cool in her hands and watched the wind lay the field over and stand it back up, the way water moves. The way Tom always said good wheat should move. The Old Glory cigar box was back on the pantry shelf where he'd kept it. There was one new receipt in it. Seed corn and seed wheat, paid in March, off Craddock's dock, and this time she had stood on that dock and watched it loaded, and she had stood in her own field and watched it go into the ground. She kept the paper. That was the job now, and she did it. Harlan Boyd had come out to the farm the week after the sale that never happened. Hat in his hands on her own porch. A called loan looks bad standing next to a proven fraud, and Boyd was, if nothing else, a man who could read which way the county wind blew. He renegotiated the note. Gave her the whole crop year to come current, and a rate a Christian could live under. She signed it at her own kitchen table, and she filed that paper in the box too. As for Merrick, he hired out 3 counties over now, the last she'd heard. Word gets around a farm country faster than blight. There wasn't a place in Weller County that would let him near a seed drawer or a charge account. And he knew it, and he went where they hadn't heard the story yet. That fall, when the wheat was in and the price was fair, a letter came, his hand on the envelope. She knew it before she opened it, and she near didn't. He asked, humble now, the way such men get humble when the money's gone, to be taken back on. Cheap, He'd work for Found and a little besides. For old times, he wrote, for Tom. Della Rourke read it once, standing at the pantry shelf. She did not answer it. She folded it back along its own creases, and she opened the old glory box, and she laid Merrick's last letter in on top of all the rest of his paper. The receipts and the ledger copy and Pell's page and the note Boyd redid. The whole true accounting of one hard year. Then she shut the lid, and she set the box back on the shelf where a dead man taught her to keep it. The dust took a lot of good ground in those years. It took families whole, blew them off the land and out to California with a mattress on the roof of the car. Della kept hers. She kept it because her husband, 30 years, kept the paper, and because his widow, when the time came, was quiet enough that a thief mistook her for beaten, and stubborn enough to read the fine print he was betting she never would. That's the thing about ground that's been done wrong. It doesn't argue. It doesn't cry. It just keeps its books, patient, one season to the next, and waits for somebody willing to add up the columns. She finished her coffee cold, the way she liked it, and she watched the last light go off the wheat. If you made it all the way out here with me, comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this one traveled.